morning, everyone. How's it going? My name is Matt Viegas. I am a student in my third and final year of physical therapy school, and I want to share moments from between my undergraduate years in college and between now with DPT school. So after I graduated college, there were still some things I needed in order to flesh out my application for PT school. That included observation hours, an anatomy class, and taking the GRE. But one of the things that was definitely on my mind, especially with the pressure from family, was finding a job, which I wanted to do after I nailed everything on my application. That way I could commit to it full time and have it be somewhere in a healthcare setting. And fortunately, that was something that happened, but it was definitely not an easy process. And I'm just gonna share my story. I'm sure other people have even better stories about getting their job. If I remember correctly, I think what happened is I had just uploaded a resume to either monster.com or like one of those websites, just random websites, and somehow corporate picked it up. One of the things I did in college a lot, especially with taking upon leadership roles, was going to the career center, making connections, and like meeting someone who had worked in the career center and asking like time and time again, like, please check my resume, like how do I add things, and like what types of words to use, like any synonyms that make this sound a little bit better or more active, and going from there. And then basically somehow my resume landed in the right hands and I got called up for an interview. But this was not my first interview. In fact, I had failed a lot before that during a job search that took months. And that's not something pleasant after graduating college and coming out of the academic bubble, because it was brutal how every single family event, gathering, dinner, and just hounding with questions about when am I gonna do this, yada 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 yada, and every time not having a solid answer. So if anything, those failures helped build some character, build some growth with the real world, and just realizing that shoot, like things aren't gonna pan out right away. And how the heck do I start saying the right things? And somehow I did that. And to pull it into this one interview that I had, and I definitely was not the only applicant for this position. I remember that day. In fact, I saved that voicemail from my former boss, who eventually wrote one of my strong letters of recommendation for PT school. I basically just realized at that point, with how down I was and everything, that it wasn't about me. And what I emphasize most of all during that interview was teamwork, working with a team, and just wanting to understand my role and how to help others. That is what I remember now, so that's definitely the key that you probably need if you're in that pre-physical therapy journey or just graduate from college, wherever you are in life. And so somehow I landed that position, and it was seemingly random over months, with my resume somehow getting pulled up from a place that I forgot I even put it up on, and getting the call back to do the drug test and start my days at work. But there's another part of that, because even when I did land that job, that very first day was not pleasant. Hey Felicia, how's it going? Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, that very first day, I've told a few people about this, and my boss knows about this as well, is how I pretty much spent 8 hours in front of a copy machine, because whoever it was before I started working there, it was an OT, occupational therapist, not giving them a bad rep, but whoever it was that person who just did not keep up with the documentation, even though when she did do it, it was good, but she just didn't keep up with the documentation. We were on paper at that time. I'll get into it later about how I had to help out with that transition to electronic documentation, which was not pleasant. But with the paper documentation, for whatever reason, this person just did not do her notes, and some pretty important notes too, like discharges or progress reports. And yeah, it was enough to warrant me spending 8 hours in front of a copy machine trying to earn the trust of others in a place that I had never been before, but I could tell just from looking around, especially during my interview, that this was a very nice place. Where this was is Mercy Retirement and Care Center in the Fruitvale area of Oakland, which is getting better. It has a very bad rap, but it's definitely a place that's getting better, especially that location. And yeah, as far as like branding, I think it's safe to say when I tell you that like there were Catholic priests and nuns, sisters there, you have a pretty good idea of what they're about and who they are. And they actually were that way from my eyes and my perspective. And so after that brutal first day of spending 8 hours, I had the chance to do something that in my mind was really crazy, which was help out with the wellness program on the assisted living side. And the reason that was so crazy is because even though I had spent time doing volunteer hours, observation hours in skilled nursing facilities, children's hospital, other settings to flesh out my PT application, even though I knew about that, I had never personally worked with residents, people living with Alzheimer's. And that in and of itself is a huge challenge for anyone. So lots of lessons learned there. It's a very intimidating situation, but what came out of that is that I learned a lot of the advice from my peers, my colleagues, the team, the rehab team, and the nursing staff who know these residents, know these people, and were willing to give tips on, hey, just try this. It feels really weird, but you gotta just somehow fake it and just pretend that, hey, we're just gonna go grab a coffee around the corner and just go walk down here and somehow trick them and get in what it is that we need to do with exercises or walking. So there were a lot of fun times with that, just starting out with that brutal first week of being at that job was crazy in that respect. And the funny thing is it got even crazier and I wanted it to. So what I mean by that is, as my role as a Rehab Tech, I was in charge more of the administrative behind the scenes responsibilities to help out with my boss, which included things like scheduling and chart reviews and all this boring stuff with like paper documentation and whatnot. But it was pretty cool to see how I had gone from unemployed to employed, and like how I was making an impact and being influential and being able to work with a team and hear what their needs were, how their days looked, especially for occupational therapists and speech therapists. If there's any reason that I feel more confident now about interdisciplinary approaches, team approaches, it harkens back to those days for me from working in Mercy, not from what I learned in PT school, because that was mostly focused on PT. But anyways, to get back to the point, working with a team, especially with a new grad OT, got to see a lot of things with what struggles it was they were facing and some of the things coming about with how the healthcare system is. What was really neat about this position and what my boss would allow me to do is that I had the opportunity to go with her to these every morning, every day stand-up meetings, see what's going on with the facility as a whole, what the other departments in the building were dealing with. We're seeing how we're trying our best to manage the care for these residents, for these patients, and address their goals, try to get them back to home safely. And all the huge ordeal with Medicare Part A and like just alphabet soup of things, ARDs, ADRs, yada yada yada. And really just seeing things in a very different light as a more holistic approach, and just how everyone as a community interacted. That is one aspect that I really appreciate about this place where I worked, that community aspect, that workplace culture, especially with the sisters, and just their level of compassion and how their dedication and care wasn't dependent on how much insurance reimbursed. I think that's the aspect that really sticks with me the most as we face these challenges, especially hearing all these issues in PT school, especially from influential people in the field. So to get back to like more of the admin stuff, with these like Medicare Part A patients, there was another admin thing that was really a big responsibility. Every month, the facility as a whole, with the leadership, the management, we have to triple check these charts for the Medicare Part A patients, because everything has to be smooth and nice. All the I's need to be dotted, all the T's need to be crossed, to ensure that the facility gets reimbursed for the care we provided. And how I began to realize, even though it is a little bit boring, my role with just making sure all the documentation that's in there is in there, everything looks nice and clean for the rehab team, with they ordered this or they did this eval on this day, and then when are their orders expired, and like all these other little nitty-gritty kind of boring things, but like things that need to be there. And how I'm not going to talk about any patients in particular, but just how like if things don't go well, like they definitely have a huge impact, And I could see from a lot of different regards by being behind the scenes in these meetings that like there's a lot of things going on, and I have respect for every member of the team, especially what they're dealing with that I don't see when I'm out there just on the floor trying to check these charts and do all these things and make sure that the residents aren't out on appointments, and we don't need to have this emergency of like I need to fix the schedule and all this other craziness. One of the coolest things is how my boss over time, she just really entrusted me with so many responsibilities, especially with holding down the fort while she went away for vacation, a much needed vacation on her part because she's the head honcho, she's a rock star, awesome, and like doing all these things, not just as a PT, but all these admin things that I help her out with too, and more. And just making sure everything runs smoothly. So what I mean to say about that is how I think I mentioned it in the blog post I shared, which I'll share the link in here. But basically, I had so much anxiety because I knew my boss and how she ran things and how she worked, and I was scared because with corporate, I wasn't sure how my boss's boss and the upper management team was going to respond to me, just a rehab tech holding down the fort while she's gone, and what things I would have to deal with, not just with them, but also with the management and leadership at the facility and their needs to make sure they get what they need, a progress report from a PT to recommend this assistive device or this paper documentation thingy that the social worker needs, billing needs, like that. It's getting pulled in all different directions, and so that problem is really what drew me into personal development on my own, and sort of I can't even remember exactly how, but I happened to stumble upon one of these websites, asianefficiency.com, and just seeing what they're saying about entrepreneurship, but mostly like how to free up your time, how to be more productive, how to start doing the things that you want to actually do, and how that led to me reading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and getting things done, and starting to practically implement that within my role as just a rehab tech to make things run more smoothly, especially when my boss is gone and not there beside me to help me when there's all these issues going on. So the biggest issue was that electronic documentation stuff. There was one day coming into the clinic where I come in and the whole team is in this super tiny office that's probably even smaller than my bedroom in my single bedroom apartment. Everyone's huddled around and they're just like, well, this iPod Touch thingy isn't working because that's how their time card for work is run, by hitting sync and starting the time there, and it wasn't working, and I just have to figure it out with what we need to do and calling around with not just talking with my boss, but like with one of the other sort of leadership people that she knows who understands this and what to do, and that hey, this electronic thing isn't working, so we got to do paper, and I had to learn that on the fly because that's how the team is getting paid for that day, and making sure everything looks crystal clear perfect so that they do get their salary, their money from that. So it was really funny coming in this one morning, just looking in, everyone's huddled around and looking at me, and I'm like, what's going on? Because obviously something's not right. And then, great, I have to be the one who figures out how to do this thing for you, and we'll work through it. And yeah, just going through that whole experience. To be fair, that was one of the best teams that I've worked with. Um, if I'm going to say not my high school cross country and track team, that's definitely one of the best teams I've worked with in healthcare, and just being supportive and like really being there to try and figure things out, not just for their needs but for everyone's needs as well, and just figuring things out on the fly. So going from there with that like little story about just things getting hectic, the transition from paper to electronic documentation, that was not an easy thing because there were so many charts and so many things to manage. I still needed to review things and having to ask upper management about what they thought, what it was that we should do to manage this situation, and how they saw what would be successful for our team, even though they're watching from afar. And I just remember how it's one of those situations where it's like, shoot, like within my role, within this team, I just need to get super organized because the team doesn't have the time to do that. They're out there treating patients, and that's their role. They're doing their thing. And me and my boss have to figure out what the heck to do, how to make sure we don't get confused with which chart is paper, which chart is electronic documentation, and how to answer the questions of the team when they're struggling with, I want to do this on electronic documentation that I used to do on paper, but it's not necessarily allowing me to do that. And yeah, just me being the one on the phone with IT on hold for what feels like days, just trying to get the simple questions asked for the team. And just how I am so glad that whole transition from paper to electronic documentation was postponed and delayed so far, that I had learned by that time how things were run in the facility, at least for the rehab team, and how to ensure the success of each individual, and just how to put up with these new problems that we face. So yeah, being organized is something I'm usually pretty good at, but that took it to a whole nother level, especially being detail oriented and not mixing up patients' names, people's charts, and how with this electronic documentation system, the most frustrating thing would be when a clinician, physical therapist, occupational therapist, whoever it was, would accidentally tap on the incorrect resident, the incorrect patient, how that would trigger doing an eval. And because of the system, it would not let you hit the back button, because once you set an eval, you have to go through it. You have to fill in all these necessary information boxes, even if it was the incorrect person. And then me just having to go back in the system later to delete that note, and then allow the PTOT to run off and go do what they actually intended to do. So there were a lot of frustrations like that we had to put up with, especially one where when I was covering for my boss and I had to go away because I was going to my cousin's wedding not in Oakland, California, but down in Southern California. So I was away too. Even though I set the schedule and tried to get everything nice and perfect, it wasn't perfect because I did the foolish thing while I was out down at the hotel for my cousin's wedding and checking my work email and then realizing that, shoot, like there's a new patient that we kind of expected, but we're hoping they wouldn't show up at this time, but they did. And how there's so much pressure for the rehab team in a skilled nursing facility to get in and do an eval right away, even though as the team we don't normally have that coverage, that staffing on weekends, especially for PTs, for OTs, for speech to do evals. And just trying to figure out that situation and coordinate from afar while I'm down at my cousin's wedding and just making the necessary text to the team. Not just picking one person, but trying to ask all of them and do what's fair because it's covering on a weekend and this person lives super far away to commute and this person lives here, and like trying to be fair is not an easy skill for anyone. But anyways, I could go on and on about these stories. The ones that I haven't covered that are really necessary to cover are the ones about the residents and the people. One of the most unfortunate things is how I had been there at Mercy Retirement and Care Center home during a time when I could sense it, I could feel it, that like the golden years are fading, and that like just with these changes in the healthcare system and reimbursement and the way things are run, that even though it's a non-profit company who's managing the facility and everything, that it is kind of like corporate, trying to make those short-term gains with rehab and trying to still do things in a way for the money, even though they are non-profit, and how that just butts heads and clashes with the values of these sisters of mercy, and how unfortunately by the time I was leaving, because I needed to go to PT school, how unfortunately a lot of these staff who had been there for a very long time, been very loyal to the facility and whatnot, had left, and how crazy it was to see this shift because these compassionate people, these sisters who had been very loyal to the community, unfortunately with the changes in healthcare and the way things were run, were not part of the team anymore. So I don't want to leave this on like a hopeless note. One more thing that I do want to share is just how even though I did see some of these patients, some of these residents that I connected with, the rehab team, everyone on the staff connected with, just seeing these people pass away and how the community as a whole would respond was very, very enlightening and very hopeful. And how even though there are the challenges with healthcare, especially people living with Alzheimer's, these diseases that may be chronic, but in the grand scope of things don't look like they have a great prognosis, cancer, all these different conditions, and just seeing how that affects people, seeing how everyone else responds, and just as the rehab team, how we would always try to do our best for the patients while still struggling with what it was that the healthcare system overall would sort of force us into and incentivize us into doing. So I'm going to leave it there because I could ramble on and on and on about this, but I really hope you enjoyed this one. I've talked for, half an hour. And that's not even enough to explain more about this place where I used to work, which was really great and has shaped me, and how I still hold dearly the Bon Voyage card from the Rehab team that they shared to me as I was heading out to PT school, and just how much they have influenced me. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, especially since I'm streaming in the morning instead of the afternoon, which is something I don't usually do because I'm going to be busy. But anyways, I hope everyone has a great day, great week, and keep it up with what you got going. All right, adios.